Hi, we're going to do a video today about imaginary trees and imaginary forests. I like to paint places that I like to go. And trees just are so important to me because trees represent growth and shelter and adventure. For those of you that still climb trees, they give you a higher vantage point. Trees are just wonderful. They give us the air we breathe. Trees are integral to our life, and they come in so many shapes and colors that you can never get bored painting trees. So let's start. Okay, we're going to start doing putting gesso on to prime our paper and to do it. So I'm going to put some gesso on there. And you can be really careful and do this with your brush, or you can just use a piece of mat board or an old credit card or one of those things you get in the mail that you normally throw away. I save them, and I can just spread the gesso with that. And I'll add a little bit of color in there, just so it's not white, okay? Mix that in and spread it. And this doesn't have to be beautiful. It's just, you're really just coating the paper, but at the same time, you're just adding some interesting color. So sometimes that's kind of fun. And you can add more than one color if you'd like to. I'm gonna put a little blue in there too. And you can make texture as you're doing this if you want to. You can use your fingers, you can use whatever you want to get the effect that you want. But this is just playtime. So and if you do want to smooth it out, you can take a damp brush and you can just kind of like feather some areas. But you just want to get everything covered. You want to get a coat of gesso on everything because it's going to seal the paper. And if you have a canvas, the same thing. You want to get an extra coat of gesso on there because the machine gesso they put on there is just a really thin layer, and you want to put a personal touch. So you want to do your own. Okay. And this may be a background I keep, or it may be one I paint over, but at least I'm not starting with white. Okay? And when you do this, go ahead and do several of them. Do a bunch of different colors. Like here I've just already prepared a bunch and let them dry so they're ready to go. So when I want to paint, I can pick one that maybe has a background color that I like. Hey, before you get started on your painting, you might want to just practice some brush strokes, some different things you can do with your brush. And I'm using just a round brush. This is a number 10 round brush, and it's thick and it goes to a point. That's the kind of brush you want to use, and it's soft. You can do so much with this shaped brush, and I'm going to show you how I do tree trunks. And people, when I was little, I always colored my tree trunks brown, but if you actually look at tree trunks, most of them are different shades of gray, or they can be any neutral that's kind of like toned down. And so one thing that this brush will do that's really nice is if you press hard, you get a thick, see how it flattens out and you get a thick stroke, and then as you pull it and lift up and get a lighter thing, it'll thin out, just like a tree trunk grows. And you want to water down your paints a little bit so they flow nicely, and then you can start doing branches. They're thicker at the base, and then as you pull up, you can get these tiny little branches. And this is so much fun, just to paint branches. I love doing this, and this is great for a winter scene, but also you can add your foliage over it, but it gives you the structure of the tree to start with. And it's fun, and notice I'm holding my brush not down at the bottom, but up higher so that I have more freedom of movement. I can do these wiggly branches. You know how branches just kind of go off in all directions. So it's more lifelike. Okay, so that's really fun to do. So you can kind of practice that so you get used to the feel of your brush doing this when you go to do your painting, and then you won't feel like you have to make mistakes. So remember, the branches are just thicker towards the base where they come out of the trunk, and then they get thinner as they go out. Okay, and also if you want to create several trees and you want some dimension, if you lighten the trees for the ones in the background, make them a little smaller, you will create the illusion that they're farther away. See how that tree looks like it's farther back behind this one? And it's so relaxing to just sit and paint like this. I love just painting branches and painting trees and painting the structure of the trees. Okay, one way to add foliage that's kind of fun is to use your sponge. You can also use your brush, but one way is to use your sponge. And I've just cut down a big sponge and made it littler so it's easier to handle, and you can like get some color on the corners. I'm just gonna get some kind of fall colors since it's September right now. And you can just kind of start adding foliage. And a fun way to make a real kind of olive green is to take your yellow and mix just a tiny bit of black into it, and you get a really nice natural olive green instead of like a really bright green like it comes out of the tube. If you buy a tube of green, they tend to look artificial, which is okay because I'm all for bright trees too, but sometimes it's nice. Oops, got a little extra paint there, but that's okay. I'm just gonna spread it around. And see how by just lightly, this is something else to practice. This is like my practice. This isn't like my finished painting. So practice a little bit while your big sheets are drying so that you can just kind of get used to these techniques. And see how I can just kind of layer different colors. And the sponge gives you a really nice texture. And you just keep doing that in layers until you get the foliage as full as you want it. If I get a little blue in there, it'll mix with the yellow and get a greenish tint too. I love fall when the greens and the reds are mixed together. I just think that's a beautiful combination. Okay, so you can keep doing that until you get a really soft, nice foliage. Okay, I'm going to show you how I do birch trees. It's kind of a fun way, and you'll see I've covered my table with plastic so that I'm not limited to a little tiny palette, and I can just put my paints out on the plastic. And I have Viva paper towels because they're really strong even when they're wet, and I can use that for... Okay, so what I do for my birch trees is I want to pick up a little bit of white on there and a little bit of black at the same time, so they're both on my palette knife. See how I have them both on there? And then I'm going to go and I'm going to start doing my trunks. I'm going to kind of just wipe like that, get a little bit more white on there, and see how you can kind of get a striated, it looks like a birch tree, and get thinner as you go up. And this is just kind of a fun way. It gets that birch tree or aspen if you're from Colorado, that texture. Let's do a bigger one here. And you just kind of scrape, and it's okay if it leaves a little blank spaces even. And I just kind of keep doing that, getting smaller as I go up. And you can do branches coming off. And okay, so I'm continuing working on my birch trees, as you can see, and like I showed you before with the brush, you can come back in and you can add some of those lacy brushes using your lacy brushes. Lacy branches, you can have them just kind of get smaller and get tiny as they go. And you don't need to add a lot because you're gonna cover up a lot of them with the foliage, but it's just kind of fun to have something to go by. So I'm just adding a lot of little branches, okay? And you let that dry before you do your foliage, and that way, if you do some foliage you don't like, you can wipe it away. And even if you don't like these branches, like I don't like those so much, or this one got kind of thick, if your background is dry, you can wipe it away and do a do-over until you like it. Okay, I'm gonna add some foliage to my birch trees, and you can use a brush and paint them in, but I like to use the sponge because it gets a more airy, lacy feel to it. So you want your sponge to be damp, and then you can just start choosing some colors, and you can pick 2 colors at once if you want to, and just start putting in the foliage. And see, I'm just using the corner of my sponge so it gets a nice lacy, airy, leafy look. And I tend to do the darker colors towards the bottom where the foliage might be thicker, and then I go to lighter colors as I go up. You just make it up as you go. Just kind of look at what you see and make decisions based on what's happening. You can make the foliage really thick, or you can make it kind of light, like some of the leaves have already dropped. It's up to you. This is your imaginary tree. This is a place that you can go and enjoy yourself. Okay. And then for the grasses, or where the trees are coming from, I want to do some sort of horizon line here. So I'm going to come in with maybe some grassy colors here. I'll put a little purple in there just for fun, to get some dark. And you can use your brush to kind of make wispy ends, like grasses. You can use your brush this way. And the secret to doing this is to come in with layers. Maybe start with your darkest layer and do lighter ones on top after that dries. You can also go in with your palette knife and you can scratch because it's dry underneath. So that layer you just put on while it's wet, you can make scratch marks into it to create texture, and it just kind of adds a fun dimension. I love sort of like drawing into wet paint. That's kind of fun. And if you don't like something, before it dries, you still have the opportunity to take a damp sponge and wipe it off, which I love. So that's why I always let my backgrounds dry first. And you might want to just bring in maybe a little, I don't know, a little horizon. Let's see. Could have something happening in the distance. Oops. Kind of thinking of the Blue Ridge Mountains here, so I'm kind of doing just maybe some distant mountain shapes and just kind of seeing what happens, knowing that if I don't like this, I can always paint over it, but I'm just trying stuff. So don't be afraid to try stuff. I like texture, so it's fun to experiment with different ways to get texture. You can even use your fingers to smooth things out a little bit. And later, if I want to put like a sunset in the background, I could come back in and do a sun back there somewhere, but I would want to wait till this dries. So anyway, that's my birch trees. What I showed you is kind of the traditional approach of painting the trunks and then adding the foliage. I'm going to show you another technique, which I call kind of party trees, okay? And this is a lot more wild, and I'm going to use a bigger brush. And I'm going to just start, and I'm not going to worry about how it works because I can paint more background, I can paint out the background, but I'm going to just start putting down a whole bunch of wild color, just crazy colors, okay? And I'm using a lot of water on my brush. Let's get some yellow in there too. Okay, I'm going to use a lot of water. And I'm going to tilt the paper and I'm going to let it kind of run down and just see what happens. And these might give me an idea of where I want my trunks to be. So it seems kind of messy and crazy, but it gives you an unexpected outcome that's kind of fun. And any drips you don't like, you can always paint out later, so don't worry about that, okay? Okay, and then another thing you can do is while this is really wet, you want to have a lot of water on here. Doesn't this remind you of being a little kid and just being able to make a mess? It's so fun. Okay, if you take some rubbing alcohol, and it can be any percent, the kind you get at the drugstore. I put mine in a spray bottle, but you could also just use the bottle. But see, when you spray it, look what happens. You get these really cool effects. You see how the paint just kind of changes? You put that alcohol down. And then you let that dry and that texture will kind of stay and you'll get these little fun textures. And it only works if it's really wet. So if your paint is tacky or starting to dry and you put the alcohol in there, it won't do anything, okay? And you can also, once your painting is dry, you can come back in and you know, kind of do a little of this spattering, which is kind of fun to do, just spatter. And that also creates kind of a party. And don't worry about where it goes because you can always paint out around and get better shapes later. You're just trying to get a fun texture to kind of give you ideas of where you want to go. And this is just one layer. I'm going to come back in after this dries with another layer and add more color. But if I add it now, it's going to get really muddy. So I'm gonna transition and get lighter and lighter. I'm going to do like 3 stages of this. So this is the first stage. So I'm going to paint out the background now. I'm going to work on the background and kind of getting a shape. So I mixed up a color that's not exactly my background color, but it's similar. And I'm going to just kind of like paint out what I don't want to paint, and I'm going to kind of get some tree shapes, maybe create some lacy edges, have a little bit more sky showing. And I'm doing this upside down, so I'm just kind of like concentrating on the shape and not getting too hung up on actual tree shapes, but just kind of doing some nice negative reductive painting where I'm painting out areas that I want to be background instead of tree. Okay, so I'm just kind of looking at shapes, and you can also like do a few spaces in there where, you know, sometimes there's what I call bird holes, fly holes in the trees where you have little spaces in the foliage. And another way you can do that is you can spatter a little bit. With the background color so that it'll look like there's little spaces in the foliage. Okay. And then for my tree trunks, there's a lot of tree trunks going on, so I might want to just come back in, and I've added paint to my, I've added gesso to my colors so that when I paint out, it'll be opaque and it'll cover over these things. So where there's just kind of too many going on, I can just eliminate some. Kind of like that crazy one. I think I'll get rid of that one. And I can add a little extra color, like maybe it's a sunset, so I'm going to add a little, change the background color a little bit there, add a little orange. Okay, I'm going to flip it around and kind of get it, oh yeah, I like that much better now when I see it right side up. And you can, if you've painted out something you want to keep, you can always just kind of wipe out places. And then I can come in with some maybe grassy, maybe add some other colors here at the bottom, make it a little, so they're grounded, so they're growing out of something. We want to give them a fertile place to grow out of, right? And just if you have a kind of a light touch, you can get that nice grassy foliage feeling at the end. And you can do this in layers too. You can start with a darker color and come back with lighter colors over it and get more depth in your foliage, right? If you have any of this bubble wrap, that's another thing you can do. You can take and add some texture with your bubble wrap if you want to come in with some of that. Add a little bubble wrap texture. It's just up to you, whatever you like. These are party trees. They're festive. They're having fun, okay? So I'm going to let that dry, and then you can come back in with more colors, more grasses, whatever. Just layer it until you're happy with the way it looks, okay? But you see how I painted out and added more sky, and now it looks more like a forest. Okay, so please send us your masterpieces. We want to see what you did from this class and tell us how you liked it. And I'm going to let these dry some more and do some more layers, and maybe I'll shoot you a picture of how it turns out. But have fun. The most important thing is just have fun with what you're doing. Thanks.